Liberation Day. President Trump's tariff announcement sends shockwaves. Is Elon Musk leaving DOGE? And the return of Spartacus. So much to cover today on 10 Minute Drill.
Everybody get up, get up.
The story of America is the story of an adventure.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
We are a nation under God, and I believe God intended for us to be free.
My voice is inadequate. My efforts today are inadequate to stop what they're trying to do.
On Monday and Tuesday, Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey gave a 25-hour speech on the Senate floor. To be incredibly clear here, it was not a filibuster. Normally, these long speeches are intended to block a piece of legislation or hold up action from taking place in the Senate. There were no bills on the floor, and there was no action that Senator Booker was interrupting. He simply wanted to give a very, very long speech. What's important to note from coverage of this speech is nobody's really pulled out any particularly new or important themes or lines, apart from the fact that if you didn't already know, Senator Booker really dislikes President Trump. There's a lot of discussion about whether or not this could motivate Democrats to bring them out of the doldrums. He sent out fundraising texts and emails. In a lot of cases, that's normally an ethics violation because you're not allowed to try and raise campaign funds based on an official action taken on the floor. But because it was not a real filibuster and had no meaning, it actually will likely protect him from any sort of ethics violation. Now, it's also important to note that Senator Booker has been preparing for this moment his entire political career. Let's go back to his famous I am Spartacus moment.
Now, I appreciate the comments of my colleagues. This is about the closest I'll probably ever have in my life to an I am Spartacus moment.
I was in the room for that. I got to be there in the room for the Kavanaugh confirmation hearing when Senator Booker announced that he was having an I am Spartacus moment, which, just like this speech the other night, had no impact on the proceedings and had no value at all for anyone except for Democrats on Twitter who were trying desperately to find something to feel motivated about. But the bottom line here is Senator Booker has not passed a bill this decade. And what Democrats are more and more doing is trying to sub in sort of theater tactics in place of any substance. And again, not passing a bill this decade suggests that Cory Booker is probably planning on running for president again, not on any kind of substance or record of achievement, but on being able to gin up some good theater. Yesterday, President Trump made shockwaves with a massive tariff announcement.
In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world.
That tariffs were coming was not a surprise. What is a surprise is the size and scale. A 10% global tariff on all imports and tariffs on more than 60 different countries on top of that. The markets reacted swiftly and very negatively. We are seeing major impact on 401ks, retirement accounts, and polling has told us for a long time the American people are not sold on the idea of tariffs as a way of lowering prices. But President Trump's promise is that if you trust the process, we will see great results in a booming economy, as well as bringing back manufacturing and bringing our supply chains back to the United States. His plan relies on two major factors. One, our trading partners coming to the table, lowering their own tariffs on the United States. The second part of that is his plan heavily relies on Congress passing an extension of the 2017 tax cuts, which we know benefited all Americans. That would lead to the economic boom that he's promising. This debate has gone on among Republicans for decades. President Trump's position on tariffs and trade is not new. It's one that he's held for several decades, and it's one that he ran on. He actually ran an ad in the New York Times in 1987. This was shown on Twitter earlier today, September 1987, 3 months after I was born, where he encouraged lawmakers to have the courage to stand up for American job creators and American employees and American manufacturing by promoting stronger tariffs and trade policy. This has been embodied by people like Pat Buchanan, who have argued for the economic nationalism. But the other side of that debate is the free traders, the more sort of Stephen Moore, Ronald Reagan, who believe that free trade has helped unlock economic opportunity and modernization for America for the last several decades. This major tariff inflection point will tell us a lot, both about who's right, but also about whose vision for the future is going to lead to the most success and prosperity. Over the weekend, Gavin Newsom was on Bill Maher's show, and he said a really interesting thing. He said the Democrat brand is toxic.
These guys are crushing us. The Democratic brand is toxic right now.
In a classic moment of we're all trying to find the guy who did this,
We're all trying to find the guy who did this.
It's important to note that Gavin Newsom has been the face of some of Democrats' most toxic fights. First, parental rights. In California, a number of school boards and parental rights groups have tried to ban schools' abilities to keep secrets from parents about what's happening with their children. Gavin Newsom has fought against that. Gavin Newsom has filed civil rights complaints to ensure that schools could keep secrets from parents about their children. This is about an 85-15 issue. Overwhelmingly, people believe schools should never keep secrets from parents about what's happening with their own kids. Gavin Newsom disagrees. Another issue that Gavin Newsom has been on the extreme on is the issue of energy and climate change. Gavin Newsom has tried to ban gas-powered cars. Gavin Newsom has tried to sue energy companies into oblivion in order to curry more favor with climate change groups. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, most recently in November, California voters had the opportunity to vote on something called Prop 36. This was a bill that Republicans and Democrats had come together to say, let's make retail theft, let's make, shoplifting illegal again. California is coming off of about a decade of crime crisis that began in large part with a bill that Kamala Harris drove called Prop 47, which lowered the threshold for penalizing people for things like shoplifting, a number of drug crimes, things like that. For the last 10 years, everyone has known it was the problem. So Democrats and Republicans got together for this Prop 36. Gavin Newsom fought tooth and nail against it to maintain the soft on crime laws that have plagued California for so long. So when Gavin Newsom says our brand is toxic, it's so important to remember it is toxic, and he had a lot to do with it.
The White House is denying a report that President Trump is telling his inner circle that Elon Musk will be stepping back in the next few weeks.
I have no intention of being an Elon-specific defender, but I do think it's so important to understand what's actually going on here. Elon is not making money off of the work that he's doing for DOGE. He's simply trying to root out the fraud, waste, and abuse that everyone has known has been going on in our government for decades. And if we can't do it now, when can we do it? And so today I want to talk about basically two kinds of DOGE opponents. The first kind is the good faith kind who have raised concerns about good programs in government that might have been cut unintentionally. This is something that Elon talked about.
Sometimes we make a mistake. Nobody bats 1,000. We will at times make a mistake, but we'll act very quickly to correct it.
Pennsylvania Senator Dave McCormick talked about this in a tweet. I'm glad Elon Musk and his team did this interview, and I encourage everyone to watch. We need this kind of transparency. I strongly support the goal of reining in government spending. Some of the examples the DOGE team has found should outrage hardworking taxpayers. And like Elon said, when they sometimes get it wrong, for Pennsylvania veterans and others, they need to fix it fast. We can all agree that getting our financial house in order is critical to our future. So Elon has talked about that, and they have been able to quickly fix some of the errors that they've made. But in a number of other instances, they have found worthwhile spending programs that were in departments that needed to be minimized or shuttered and moved them to other places. For example, we talked about the Department of Education. One of the valuable programs that they have is funding for students with disabilities. That can be moved into HHS. They're also from USAID, where a number of really important humanitarian programs that can simply be moved into the State Department without having this multiple $100 billion organization needing to continue to fund waste, fraud, and abuse around the country. But if you are arguing that we need to maintain, for example, a $250 billion Department of Education because of one very narrow program that only is a small percentage of their outputs, that is how we got into this mess in the first place, is thinking that we need to keep a lot of bad for just a little bit of good. And I think that's a big problem here. But the other kind of DOGE opponents are people that are actively defending fraud, waste, and abuse in our government. I love the movie Casino by Martin Scorsese, and there's a great scene in that movie where Robert De Niro describes going into the vault of the casino. Now, the casino is a front for organized crime, and so what Robert De Niro describes is the skimming, that everyone involved in the casino is able to take a little bit off the top, a little bit of a cut, for themselves and get richer and richer. Later on in the movie, there's an amazing scene where they find out that they are being skimmed by their skimmers. My favorite line in perhaps the entire movie is when one of the mobsters says, it's part of the business. It's considered leakage. It's very unfortunate, but our government is built in that same way. And when you look very closely about how money is skimmed throughout the bureaucracy. It's unfortunate how similar it feels to an organized crime ring. But we talked about this with the Department of Education. Our money is taken in taxes, and before it can make it back to the actual goods and services we've come to expect, it's skimmed along the way. And one of the biggest reasons for that is government unions. Last week, President Trump introduced a new executive order focused on beginning to eliminate the strength of government unions. Government unions are one of the most toxic forces in our federal government. I've talked about this before. FDR, who again is one of the most valuable, heroic figures to Democrats today, was strongly against government unions. He said this: "All government employees should realize that the process of collective bargaining, as usually understood, cannot be transplanted into public service." There's a lot more to that quote, but he was strongly against government unions because they would exist to negotiate against the taxpayers. And so having unionization of government employees made no sense as a system, but it came into place anyways, and they have played a massive role in lowering the quality of service that we can expect from our government, making it so much harder to get rid of fraud, waste, and abuse, and to ever fire any government employee who is not living up to the standards that we would normally expect for any kind of private sector company or entity like that. Wednesday was the deadline for President Trump to consider deals for a sale of TikTok. A group called the American Parents Coalition sent a letter to J.D. Vance and had a mobile billboard circling the White House. They said, "TikTok's algorithm preys on vulnerable minds by feeding a steady stream of toxic content." Now, we remember when people like Vivek Ramaswamy and others said that TikTok was digital fentanyl. We've heard for years warnings from the national security community about how the Chinese use TikTok to spy on our children. We all overwhelmingly understand the importance of getting rid of Chinese control on this app. So we will see what happens with this, and any deal will have to also be approved by China. There's been a lot of conversation that President Trump could use a TikTok deal as leverage with tariffs. We'll see where that goes. But the most important thing is getting the insidious influence of the Chinese Communist Party away from our children through this app. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us for 10 Minute Drill. Please leave a comment, like, subscribe on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us.